What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
I'm Dave. Your voice is low.
And this is the Deep Dive. Yeah. A little congested today, but we're here and we're excited to do this. I wouldn't miss the podcast. I feel like I missed so many podcasts. I'm like, all right, we're doing the podcast. I don't care if I have to sound like Barry Manilow or something like that. You know what I mean? We're here to do it.
Do you feel okay, though?
I do feel okay for the most part. It's like I kind of, like in the mornings and stuff, I feel a little foggy, but then once I kind of get going, it's good. I don't know what's blooming, but I've taken all the like cold medicine doesn't help. So it's like allergy medicine has been helping. So
maybe your voice is just changing.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
If it just got deeper all of a sudden.
That's a little scary.
Hello, everybody. I don't know why I feel like I have to talk slower when I have a deeper voice, but anyway, we're here, the deep dive. We're on our second series or second sermon of the series, The Space Between Us. And today we're focusing in on gossip and how that impacts relationships and stuff like that. So, Dave, you got anything to kind of jumpstart us?
You said it well. That's what we're doing today.
Well,
so let's get going.
Let's do it. Well, Dave, anything fun happened since our last podcast for you?
Oh, no, just busy. Business. Yeah.
Yeah, we had Finley's birthday party over the weekend, so that was a good time. I got to bust out some of my old youth ministry chops and throw some games for them, and it's just fun. You know, having everybody in the backyard and kids running around, it's just a fun day.
You're kind of a fun guy.
I try to be.
Yeah, sort of like a mushroom.
Oh, yeah, I knew it was coming, and I just tried to slow it down. But anyway, well, why don't we just jump straight into it? The sermon, talk about gossip.
So we were talking about this for 5 weeks. We are looking at relationships, really, but the space between us, things that can cause brokenness and dysfunction, and just make relationships hard. Right. And relationships seem to be particularly strained in the times in which we're living in, and so I thought it was a good, timely thing. And so this week we looked at one of the things that can be a huge relationship killer, and that is gossip. And kind of goes back to elementary school and high school, and you kind of got your little cliques talking about one another. And that's maybe where at least sometimes my mind goes when we think about gossip. But
sure,
but gossip can be a tremendous toxic challenge for not just families, but for churches and for other institutions as well.
Sure.
And so just kind of looking at some biblical instruction of how we can do better, how to know, for example, when it is gossip.
Yeah.
Part of it goes back to the thing that your parents probably taught you. If you don't have something nice to say about somebody, don't say anything at all. But, we are faced, and one of the things that I did early in the sermon was, it's not just saying something when somebody is not around.
Right.
Because I think there is a time and place that sometimes you have to address things. And so I wanted to be clear about that, particularly because churches can have a bad track record of some, what I would call spiritual abuse, in places when people are trying to say that something is wrong, right, or they're, they've got some sort of abuse or issue that's going on, and they try to raise it to leadership or raise it to people that they feel like can do something about it, and then they're called gossip and get shunned and talked about in another way.
Basically, try to silence them through
try to
skills or whatever.
That. And I know it happens in other places as well. And there's been some institutional abuse that's happened in a lot of organizations where people who have tried to speak up weren't allowed to, and were sort of labeled as being gossips. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the negative, bad part of, when we are talking behind somebody's back out of a bad heart.
Yeah.
That was there's intention, at least for ill will, I think, or at least, it's not something that's leading to a solution to the problem.
Right.
It's causing harm. And so that's kind of the basis of where we talked about and try to look at some reasons why people gossip. Why do you think people gossip? Why?
I don't know. I think in some ways people like to feel like they know what's going on around them. I think in some ways it's about maybe feeling better about their own circumstances to kind of, that what the way they say, misery loves company, like to kind of fit into that mold of like, oh, well, at least I'm not that bad, to try to give them some validation or something like that.
I think you're right on with that. I mean, I think there's lots of reasons, even boredom sometimes, of why people gossip. But I think where it gets particularly harmful is when it's there becomes a strain in relationships. Let's, for example, just to have a description here.
Sure.
It's me and you talking.
Yep.
And we have a good relationship, but something happens in that relationship to cause struggle.
Right.
And so, rather than dealing with it and saying, hey, what's going on here, and talking it out, another person is brought in, and so I reach out to somebody else to talk about you. And it makes me feel a little bit better because it makes me feel a little bit more secure, is to try to turn them against you. And so it doesn't deal with the problem at hand, and it ends up calling what they call an emotional triangle or a triangle.
Yeah.
And if you get into an organization like a church where a lot of triangulation is taking place and people aren't talking to each other, they're talking about each other.
Yeah.
It can cause so much harm. It limits trust, right?
Yeah.
And it makes people suspicious of one another. And so, how, can we do better than that? And, the scripture, Matthew Gospel, talks about how, if you have a problem with somebody, you should go directly to them in private.
Yeah.
Those are Jesus' words for it. And then if you're able to reconcile with them, then, you've won them back over. And so I think that's good advice for us, but it's hard sometimes, right? If there's tension that's going on, it's so much easier to go somebody else and say, hey, he's really a bad guy, and can you believe he said this? And, to try to triangle them in just to make, the person feel more secure.
Why do you think that more people aren't willing to just kind of head it off and, like, if there's an issue, just go talk to the person? Because I do feel like, I can't speak for whether it was worse 30 years ago or whatever, but like gossip is something that has been around and will be around for a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of times it tends to be, either a situation that you're involved in or somebody that, like you said, they're kind of triangling or they're trying to like talk through it and hopefully see like validate their own feelings or whatever. But like sometimes it's just like, just go talk to the person, just communicate. Why do you think we have a problem with that?
And there's probably a variety of reasons. I think that, some of us are wired up not to like confrontation at all.
Yeah.
And probably out of some own hurt that they've had when there was a confrontation and they were hurt, maybe they were bullied or mistreated, or just it was a bad, it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And people, who wants to feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And so rather than face that uncomfortable, it's much easier to try to, bring somebody else in to make us feel more comfortable,
right.
To agree with us or to, vent. And so, understanding when is it just venting and when is it gossip?
Yeah.
And that's where I think we get into some gray areas when it comes around to this area.
Yeah. And I think when we're kind of talking about that kind of side as like gossip versus venting, I think a lot of that kind of depends on how you're talking about it and who you're talking to it about it with. If your intention is just to be like, hey, you'll never believe what I heard, probably more of the gossip thing. But if it's more of like, like us, there's been times we sat in each other's office and vented about something going on, and it might have to do with people, but it's not necessarily out of malicious intent. You know what I mean? It's
right.
more of like, I just
concern.
need help, like siphoning through this a little bit.
Understanding, that there's this willingness that we really do want to improve the situation.
Yeah.
But still, I do think you have to watch this razor edge that we walk in those kind of conversations, that it doesn't fall over onto the other other side
Right.
in a way that's going to bring harm? Are we trying to work towards a solution, something that's going to heal a problem? Or is it simply, I want to share some salacious details about somebody
Sure.
for the sake of that? So I think those are questions that we have to bring to mind whenever we're talking about somebody when they're not present.
Yeah.
Do we have their best interest in mind when we're talking?
Like, are you talking about it to help come up with a solution, or are you talking about it just to throw it out there and air it out for people?
I think it's conferring, and there's gossiping. I mean, and we do that, like, for example, and talking about staff members that we might be fixing to do an evaluation on.
Yeah.
What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses?
Right.
And you want to encourage people to be the best they can be.
Right.
So how do you best do that? So,
and you have to talk about both. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just be like, "Hey, you're great at this," and we're just going to ignore this, because to build people up, sometimes you're meeting them in some of those spaces where it's like, "Hey, we're not the best here. I'm not saying I am, but here are things maybe we can work on together to get to where we need to be."
yeah. And I think, we're talking about, one-on-one small group kind of conversations.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to take stock and remember that how gossip can spread like a wildfire.
Yeah.
And so, I know people that they'll keep secrets one person at a time. And so they repeat it, they repeat it, and suddenly there's this wildfire going.
Yep.
And people are, maybe, the old game where you whisper in somebody's ear and whisper somebody's ear. So you get down the line, and something that might have been a minor issue suddenly becomes just this huge conundrum to try to overcome.
Kind of like that the fishing tale too, where it's like, "Oh yeah, I caught a fish this big," and then the next person who tells is like, "Hey, got a fish this big," or whatever.
But that would be good gossip, right?
I guess that is good gossip.
A good gossip. But yeah, I mean, I have heard, things are, for example, around the church where there's been some little issue that went by, but then the gossip mill, rumor mill, gets a hold of it, and then you hear back and goes like, "Say what?
Yeah.
No, that wasn't what happened at all." So,
and we would like to say that the church doesn't have a rumor mill.
Yeah.
But it does, and
Sure.
and it's about finding ways to make sure we're not being malicious and stuff like that. I mean, there's been times where I've had to be very careful with what I say, this just being on with certain people.
Yeah.
Because that it might go a little past that, you know what I mean? Because of just past histories or whatever.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to watch, watch yourself.
Because gossip, and three of the points that I made, a gossip hurts the person being talked about.
Yes.
But it also hurts the person who is speaking, and it also hurts the person who is listening.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, all three of those things need to be bared in mind when we're sharing information.
Right.
And questioning ourselves, does this really need to be talked about?
Right.
If somebody is coming to you and they're sharing something and it feels a little uncomfortable, one of the suggestions I made was something I picked up in some of my reading last week, was like to ask the question, why are you telling me this?
Yes.
Or have you talked to the other person?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I have people that, well, I use the example. I would hope that I would do better than this, and I probably do. But I do know that, at least in the case when it comes to talking about other preachers, I'm pretty consistent with this part of my life, and that is, if somebody comes to me, particularly if somebody of a church where I've served, and they want to talk about the other preacher, or even here if they want to talk about the previous preacher, I shut that down, and usually I'll say, if it's somebody from a previous church coming to me, I'll say, have you talked to them?
Yeah.
And I think, however that applies to your life, in your relationships, in your families, in your, work or whatever, I think that's a pretty good practice to have. It's worked for me.
I bet that's happened to you a lot, just as the itinerant system.
I won't say a lot, but it has happened to me a number of times.
Yeah. So you haven't gotten a ton of like, when you go to a new church, they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm glad you don't do this like so-and-so did," or, you know what I mean? Like kind of that back and forth of like.
I will say that. And what I try to do, and that is engage, because, whether early in my ministry, I might have been led into like, oh wow, I'm
Look at
think
me.
like but now I realize if that person will talk about my predecessor, they're going to talk about me.
Yep.
So if somebody's doing that, or if you're out there listening and you have a tendency to try to do that with a new preacher, realize they're probably going to put a red mark by your name as that's not somebody you can really trust.
Yeah.
If they're talking to me about somebody that came before me, they'll talk about me.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Especially in negative sense.
in negative ways.
There's definitely the like historical sense of like, oh, this is what they did, and
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm talking about a negative sense. If they're trying to triangle with me
yeah,
because of somebody who came before, so it lowers my trust to people.
yeah,
With
for
that.
sure.
Yeah. But anyway, and so one of the things that I kind of ended up with as we got towards the end of the sermon was looking at Wesley's 3 simple rules, because I think when it comes to our conversations and our talking about people, is to consider what Wesley said about first do no harm.
Yeah,
And so to have that, it is what I'm about to say. It is there a possibility this is going to cause harm?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, this will cause harm, then we probably need to keep our mouth shut. And then and do good. And so I think can we, if we got this tension that's building up with the other person, how can we do good in that situation?
yeah,
And maybe it does bring somebody else in.
sure.
Let's say somebody is practicing some destructive behavior, or there's something that another person really could bring some good and help in healing that relationship. Yeah, then do good with that.
Yeah.
With that, and then in all things, stay in love with Christ. And so understanding that the reason that we see it listed in a list of like real grievous sins, like I quoted from Romans 1 on Sunday, is the fact that I think the biblical writers, and certainly Jesus himself, realized how destructive gossip could be.
Yeah,
And so it hurts our relationship with God when we find ourselves getting caught in the whole gossip thing and the rumor mill and all of that.
yeah. I think the do no harm is a very good metric. And recognizing that your words do have the power to hurt. Back to that old saying, sticks and stones could break my bones, but words
Yeah,
will always hurt or whatever.
true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or never hurt. But yeah, that's not true. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that words have an impact. And I do want to speak to just like a little something, and maybe it's a little side, but it's kind of prevalent in at least one of my girls' life is, they did kind of hear through the gossip chain at school that somebody might be hurting themselves.
Yeah.
And she was afraid to say something because she was afraid it would do harm to her relationship with that person.
Right.
And, it's one of those things that and there are some situations where you kind of have to weigh the harms of like, I don't want this person to hurt themselves, so I'm going to help them find the word, even if I'm not technically supposed to know about it. Or do you know what I mean? Like,
You want the best interest of the person involved.
yes,
And yes, they may be mad at you because you told,
right.
but it was done out of a heart of wanting and intending what was best for them.
Best for them. Yep.
Yeah.
At least what you perceive. So
Right.
I just want to throw that out there just because, like I said, it's something that I've experienced myself down the road or before, but also I know people who are experiencing that. So, but yeah, the do no harm, a good litmus test.
Yeah. And then, and we've said on both sermons, I don't want to be like, that do these 3 things and your life's going to be great, and that you're always going to know, because sometimes you may just have to prayerfully consider, do I need to say something or not?
Yeah.
I remember going out one time to a restaurant and seeing some people that weren't married they were married, but not to each other,
Right.
together in a very, looked like compromising situation.
Yeah.
And so what do I do with that information? How is the best way to approach it? And, we could sit here and strategize of, would you tell their spouse who is a friend of yours? Would you go directly to them and confront them? is what you saw,
Right.
and so it gets very fuzzy about what we do sometimes, or is it just none of my business?
Right.
And so those can be hard calls because we should always be thinking about those rules. First, do no harm. What would be the best thing to do? The situation sometimes it takes prayer, and maybe that's the time you need to go to somebody that you can really trust and say, "Hey," and you're not saying it because you're trying to spread salacious gossip. You're like, "I don't know what to do here."
Yeah.
And so those are sort of indirect ways. If we're just not talking about somebody when their other person's around, I realize there's some gray area where there might be exception. We've got to check our own heart and make sure that if we are bringing another person in, that this is a trustworthy person and not somebody who's going to start the rumor mill.
Right.
So, those are hard calls.
And I think that's valuable, and that's something I would encourage if you don't have or maybe you're just not quite sure, is to try to find somebody to be in a relationship like that, because I do think sometimes it helps to be able to talk through some of these situations, especially when some hard stuff might be happening. That's like, I don't even know what to make of all this or whatever, but it's being careful, and it's always keeping the main part, I guess, or the party that you're talking about, trying to keep their best interest at heart. Is like, I'm trying to figure out my best course of action to help this person, not blabbing it to somebody else so that they can go talk, so I do think it takes somebody you trust. I think it's somebody that you can, hold accountable, but somebody also that can hold you accountable to making the right decision.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Nick, I think we can both agree that bad gossip is a bad thing.
Oh, for sure.
And it is, sometimes gossip can be kind of like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. It's kind of hard to define.
Yeah.
But I do think it's something that we do know. We do know most of the time, that what we're doing is gossiping.
Yeah. I don't think there's like a hard and fast tell all the time, but I've always kind of been under the impression that if I have to, like, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I have to kind of be like,
right,
let me tell you something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That might be an indication, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If I'm making sure so-and-so's not right there, I got something for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That could be one of those ways, but I agree, it's not always.
It's not
Jell-O to a wall. That's a new one for me.
I think that there are those. We've talked about the incidences where it falls in the gray area, but I think more often than not, we know.
Yeah.
This is gossip.
Sure.
This is why we're saying it feels so good. The Proverbs describes it as like tasty morsels.
Yeah.
But I would say they were tasty morsels of junk food that really don't bring sustenance, and they're going to eventually make us sick.
Yeah.
And so, to be aware of that, try to be in a right relationship with God so that, and have that be such a high priority for us that we won't want to do it because it's going to damage not just our relationship with that person or some other person, but our relationship with God.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been interesting kind of talking through this here with you today, because like, I would say I'm not a huge gossiper.
You're not. I would concur.
But it's not something that I'm always exempt from either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like there are spaces at times where I definitely feel this. So I feel some of that, like a little bit of like angst about it. You know what I mean? Like even talking about it, that little bit of conviction, I guess, is kind of like, there's been times that I've fallen into this. And I think maybe, I don't know if you guys could sense the uncomfortableness, but like it does feel a little uncomfortable, because this is a place that, like, if I can fall short, I know anybody else can fall short too. So it's kind of hard to speak of like, well, I'm not perfect at this. What makes me worthy to come and speak on behalf of it to you guys, But I think at some level, the beauty of podcast, the beauty of this type of format is that if we can be real with each other and understand that, like, we're all progressing in our Christian walk, and we know that this is one of those things that can be a stumbling block. And let's open up the conversation about the stumbling block to hopefully not be a stumbling block in the future. You know what I mean? And as long as we recognize that, like, something like gossip is really easy for anybody, then we understand that the power that it can have.
It's all around, and hearing what you just said, Nick, I preached on this on Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon, I was at a conversation with somebody,
Yeah.
and suddenly I had this huge conviction with somebody. It's like, oh, holy cow, this is gossip.
Yeah. Like you just finished the conversation. You're like,
the conversation.
crap.
I can't justify this in any way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we all struggle with
Right.
it. And, I think that is this sort of the grace that we walk in, that we are going to do things that are going to hurt other people.
Right.
We are going to fall short. However, we're pointing to an idealism of following Christ, a high idealism of following Christ, that there is a way
Yep.
that is true and just and good. And that should be our pursuit.
Right.
Not that we're, there,
Right.
but the fact that we recognize that that's where we want to go.
And it takes effort and it takes work to understand it, to see it, and to be able to go, no, I'm not going to be about that, and that's just, we've used the word practice here before. It's like working out, like you just kind of have to get those reps in and understand you're going to mess up at times. Sometimes the muscle's going to hurt a little bit, but then the next time you do it right, and you go, hey, look, and those positive reps kind of build on top of each other.
Yeah, but people have been very hurt by gossip, and probably if we had time to share, we could probably relate
Sure.
stories of where we've been hurt.
Yeah.
I know that I've personally been hurt by gossip. Some of it half truths, some of it just made up stuff about me,
Yeah.
and it hurts. And I think we need to remember how destructive it can be, and that's a good segue into what we're moving into this week. And we're talking about forgiveness. And I've titled this sermon. I've had broad categories for the first couple, but holding on to hurtful things, things that hurt us, because all of us have things that have deeply, deeply hurt us, and there's other people involved, and we need to forgive, but it's just so hard.
Yeah.
How do we get past that hurt? And what's appropriate ways of forgiving people? Does it mean that we just become a doormat and let people, do we let them back in when they've abused us so much? How do we move on from that? And so the Bible has some great things to say about that.
Sure.
And great direction to give to us on that. And, you mentioned the process and practice.
Yeah.
That is, forgiveness, I think it can be an event in some cases. I stepped on your toe, I'm sorry, okay, it's over. But lots of times forgiveness is a process.
Right.
It is a practice. And so we'll be looking at that on Sunday.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about it more. And we're right here at our wrap up time. I don't know how we do it. It's just you kind of get I mean, we do have the clock here, but I feel like half the time we're not even looking at it. It's just like, oh, we're here. We're conversation finished.
Feels like 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you guys, thank you guys so much for watching. You know where to find us if you got any questions, comments, even want to share stories about how gossip has hurt or places where maybe you've succeeded and maybe even failed, if you're willing to be that vulnerable when it comes to it. You can drop it in the comments section on our Facebook, the YouTube, when this will be posted. Shoot us an email if you want to, phone calls, whatever. But without any further ado, thank you guys so much for watching. Dave, you got anything to add?
Just God bless. Have a great rest of the week.
All right. Thank you guys. We'll catch you next time.